listening, and welcome to episode 3 of Manchester to Madrid World Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Rogers, and I'll be joined today by my good friend and co-host of the show, Sam Johnson. Today we have a great episode planned for everyone. Later we will be discussing Sam and I's all-time Manchester United Real Madrid combined 11. If you're checking us out for the first time and like what you hear, we would greatly appreciate if you subscribed, followed us on Podbean, and shared with 3 of your friends that love football as much as we do. We are available everywhere you listen to your podcasts, including Apple, Google, and Spotify. Find us on Twitter at RRMTMFootball and at SJ10MTM, or send us an email at mtmfootballpod@gmail.com. We will do our very best, like usual, to respond to anything sent our way, and now let's get started with our 3rd ever episode. What's up, Sam?
Yeah, doing well today, Ryan. Kind of missing football more than ever, as usual, kind of trying to adapt to the new norm of quarantine, but it does seem like we are turning a corner here in the coronavirus. Moving towards football again. Of course, the Bundesliga coming back next Friday as we're recording this. And yeah, just generally ready to get things back to normal. How about you?
Yeah, super excited. I touched on it last time on the return of Bundesliga, but La Liga teams are getting back to training, and Bundesliga starts next Friday. Saturday we have Schalke and Dortmund, which is a huge derby, so everyone's really excited about that. But overall, I'm excited to see football coming back. Hopefully everyone will remain healthy, all the tests will come back negative, and we'll be able to enjoy the sport we all love, and all the players will remain safe.
Yeah, and then obviously one thing we were talking about, Ryan and I, right before we started recording was the amount of attention that the Dortmund and Schalke game is going to get next week. Of course, being like kind of the first sporting event back around the world in any sport from the quarantine. So yeah, that'll be exciting to watch. So now we'll move on to some bold predictions for the week. My bold prediction for this week is that Paul Pogba will not leave Manchester United. A lot of United fans are split on this. Some fans want him to leave. Some of us want him to stay. But in my opinion, I'd like him to stay, and I think he will. There's a lot of links linking him to Real Madrid, Juventus, back to Juventus where he had such good success. For a variety of reasons, maybe he wants to leave the club. Maybe the club isn't exactly on the right trajectory or, where he expected it to be when he joined. But I think, obviously, Paul Pogba, on his day, when he's healthy, when he's on his game, when he's in the right mind, he is one of the best midfielders on the planet. And so I think, from Manchester United's point of view, there's no reason to sell him at this point, especially for the return that we could get for him. I'll speak about Juve first in that regard. Juventus have talked a lot about a potential swap deal with a couple of players, maybe Aaron Ramsey, maybe Paulo Dybala possibly, but I just think that that's not really realistic for either of the clubs. I think for United, we turned down Paulo Dybala last year. I think the player was really wanted more money, and I don't think that's the type of player that we wanted to see at Old Trafford. And I think that what Paul Pogba gives us, as I mentioned earlier, is just a fantastic midfielder when he's on his game. So if we could find that Paul Pogba again, I feel like he would be a huge asset and a huge influence for us pushing, like really getting that top 4 next year. And then with Real Madrid, I think it's always going to be kind of a link there with Zinedine Zidane being the coach there, but kind of with the disagreeing opinions of Florentino Perez and Zinedine Zidane there at Real, it's really not very clear, what direction they want to go in terms of Paul Pogba and whether they want to just focus on other transfer targets or, stick with, maybe Martin Odegaard, who's coming back next year from loan.
Yeah, I think Perez and Zidane have always sort of had a difference in mind when it came to the Pogba deal. It seems like Zidane has always wanted him. He's been part of that dream signing that will help Zidane lead the transition into the new era for Real Madrid, similar to Kylian Mbappe. But Perez, on the other hand, seems to have never had the same opinion of him. We've looked at other midfielders. Obviously, Sam mentioned Odegaard might be coming back next year. We've also been looking at Camavinga, Fabian from Napoli. There are definitely some strong links there, so we'll definitely see what happens. I think 2 things make Sam's bold prediction likely. One of that being United's newly found ambition. It looks like they're pushing for players like Jadon Sancho, Jack Grealish, really good players that will improve their team. They obviously signed Bruno Fernandes, who is a world-class player and really elevates that midfield. I think Pogba will recognize that, and although Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is a fairly unexperienced coach, I think he's going to end up sticking around. The other thing that makes it so key is just the coronavirus situation. So many clubs, especially the big ones, are losing tons of revenue because stadiums are empty, player values are dropping. A lot of clubs aren't going to have the money to be able to pay for these world-class players. I don't think we're going to see any huge transfers this summer. So you combine those two things together, and I think Pogba could definitely stay at Manchester United.
Yeah, and just to add kind of one more point to that, it's kind of what you were saying about the coronavirus, but it's the opposite of that. Manchester United, we have Paul Pogba, who is one of the biggest commercial assets in football in terms of social media following, jersey sales, the influence that he has on kind of the younger generation of footballers. That's something that I don't think United really can afford to lose right now. That's part of the United brand of having the best players in world football, the biggest influences, the biggest followings. That's definitely a huge part of what Paul Pogba means to United. So now, Ryan, let me hear about your bold prediction.
So my bold prediction, I've kind of weighed up a couple, but I'm going to go with this one. This is definitely more of a long-term bold prediction, and only time will tell what will really happen, but I'm going to say that Fede Valverde ends up having a better career than Frankie de Jong. Last year and the year before that, we kind of saw the beginnings of Frankie de Jong, and he's obviously blown up across the world. He's widely loved. Obviously, by many Barcelona fans, he's seen as the heir to that Xavi and Iniesta role that they've been missing for so long. But out of nowhere, we've also seen Fede Valverde this season have a huge role under Zinedine Zidane. And to be frank, I think Fede Valverde has had a drastically better year than Frankie de Jong. He's performed on every stage he's played. I think he's even played more minutes. He's played in a more important role than Frankie de Jong has. And although a lot of you may disagree with me, and it's a hot take, it's a bold prediction for a reason. So I think Fede Valverde has a hugely promising career ahead of him. If he were to be partnered with Martin Odegaard in the middle of the field for Real, I think we could see Fede becoming an absolute elite level center midfielder.
I definitely can see what you're coming from there, and I do definitely understand that Fede Valverde has had an incredible year this year. Been a big part of Real Madrid's midfield, but what, in your opinion, kind of determines that success? Is it trophies? Is it just overall performance? Or is it longevity? What would that be?
That's actually a really good question. I think longevity-wise, it's pretty much a toss-up, assuming none of them have any huge major injuries, such as like a knee or Achilles or something like that. I think they're roughly around the same age. They will probably have the same career at the highest level in terms of years goes. Trophies may have an impact. I don't see Barcelona being really good for that much longer, to be honest. Lionel Messi probably only has 3 or so more years till he's 35, 36 even. And once Messi finally starts declining or eventually leaves Barca, unless Frankie de Jong switches clubs in the meantime, he'll be at Barcelona. And I think they're in for a really big rebuild, similar to when Cristiano left Real. So I think trophies has part to do with it. Another part, I just think Fede Valverde offers a little bit more in terms of output. Frankie de Jong is extremely aesthetically pleasing to watch. He can control a midfield. He's a beautiful footballer, but Fede Valverde offers that thing that you can't really just put your finger on, but it's something about his work ethic, the way he plays, his disruption. He can get up and down the field. He truly is a box-to-box midfielder. I think he's certainly more mobile, and he also offers a lot more in front of goal than Frankie de Jong.
No, I think you make a great point here. I mean, I cannot wait for La Liga to get back going so I can pay attention more to what you were saying, because I think that's a great thing to look at. I think Frankie de Jong, he really grabbed all of our attention and kind of climbed his way into all of our hearts last year with Ajax's kind of Cinderella run deep in the Champions League, and I think that will always kind of hold him at a level above Fede Valverde in terms of global, I guess, appreciation. But I think, of course, I've watched plenty of Fede Valverde. He's a fantastic player, but, there are some differences in their games. I think, Frankie de Jong, you're not going to see him cover as much area as Fede Valverde. Frankie de Jong's much more of a, I guess, more of a holding midfielder instead of a, kind of 6 box to box, in my opinion. But no, that'll definitely be very interesting to see, and definitely something that we'll have to watch, and I'll be super interested to kind of follow in the coming years.
So for our next segment in the show, we are going to touch on our weekly news regarding Manchester United and Real Madrid. I'm going to hand it over to Sam and let him kick it off with Manchester news.
Yeah, so, as I mentioned in the last episode, there's really not much to report on in terms of solid factual news right now. we can talk about transfer speculation all we want, but there's really nothing that kind of jumps off the page in terms of anything solid or anything right now. We're just kind of at a waiting time in England and specifically Manchester United. But I will talk about a couple of potential transfer rumors that we are seeing. A lot of people have been kind of weighing up what will happen to Alexis Sanchez over the next couple of years. Of course, being on loan at Inter Milan as we speak, but kind of getting over an injury. I'm not exactly sure what the timeline of that injury is, and if we might see him back again playing for Inter at the end of the season, if Italy does finish the season. But I think there's been a lot of talk about Ollie maybe wanting to use him, integrate him back in the team, but I think this just comes with how Ole Gunnar Solskjaer runs his team in a very positive way. I cannot see United wanting to keep Alexis Sanchez around right now, given the amount of wages he's on. When he's in the Premier League and not on loan, he's one of the top 3 or 4 wage earners in the Premier League, which is ridiculous for the very minimal output he's given us in the last couple of years. But I think, we do see a lot of rumors around him, most specifically kind of one recently that he might want to move back to his home country in a team there, Universidad de Chile. Obviously, this just depends on what he'd want in wages, what that potential transfer fee would be from Manchester United. I can't expect us to kind of expect that much. I would figure we would just want to get him off the books as soon as possible. But if there is a truth that maybe Ollie wants to use him, in the team next year, we'll actually have to wait and see. I just can't see that happening. And just another transfer to speak on really quick. Chris Smalling, of course, on loan at Roma right now, having a fantastic season, having a kind of a revitalization year for his career. It's been great to watch him in a system that doesn't put as much pressure on him, and in a league that isn't necessarily as quick and can definitely highlight his strengths as well, and maybe hide a couple of his weaknesses, which we've all seen kind of, that his weakness in distributing the ball and maybe his maybe some bad decision making from him sometimes. In terms of him coming back to the club, it'll be super interesting to see how we want to deploy him, whether that would be in a starting role, which I can't imagine right now, given the center back options we have. So maybe, I guess it's possible for another loan back out to Roma or a different club, or maybe just selling him permanently. It's just, at this point, I guess it's up to see, where United's at, where we want to go with the team, and of course where we're at with the coronavirus. But yeah, that's kind of all we've got going on with United news this week.
Yeah, Chris Smalling is an interesting one. There's a saying that goes, if it works, don't fix it. And I think this is the first time in Chris Smalling's career where we've seen a consistent output from him. His displays have all been fairly good. At United, he had many up and down seasons, up and down months, like very small periods where he was really good, others where he was an absolute disaster. He's dealt with some injuries, an inconsistent partner, but at Roma, he's really found his feet this year. Now, granted, they don't have the talent United does, but somehow he's performed week in, week out. So I think he should definitely consider staying at Roma. I think if they could work out a fee between United, whatever that may be, I think it would be a really good option for him to stick to Serie A.
And just something that I kind of wanted to add on, with the England national team, it would be super interesting to see whether Gareth Southgate would kind of, consider Chris Smalling in the team for, maybe some of the friendlies and some of the matches leading up to the Euros next summer. But we'll just have to wait and see. And England's struggling in that position. I think, maybe Harry Maguire is one of those spots, and then maybe the other position might be kind of for grabs. And if Chris Smalling were to go back to Roma and have a similar season, I could definitely see him sniffing around the England national team again. So, Ryan, let's hear about some Real Madrid news for this week.
Yeah, so like Sam said, because of the coronavirus and the halt in football, there's not too much going on right now. Last episode, I touched on the players returning to training, all being coronavirus tested. We are awaiting those results patiently. But like Sam, I'm going to touch on just a few brief transfer things from Real Madrid this week. So first off, we're expecting Alvaro Odriozola, Hakimi, Reguilon, Odegaard, all those loans, even Lunin as well, all those loans will be coming to an end of this season, and it'll be interesting to see which ones stay and which ones don't. It looks like Odriozola is just deemed no longer needed at the club. We could send him to a Spanish club or possibly the Premier League. There are a lot of teams that need a right back. Now, I don't rate Odriozola that highly. He's an okay defender, but I think we could definitely get a decent price for him and ship him out. Odegaard and Hakimi look like much more likely options to stick around. Hopefully the situation with Sociedad and Odegaard and Madrid gets sorted, and I would love to see Odegaard back in Madrid next year, especially now that Pogba, Fabian, those other midfield targets we've been looking at don't seem to be likely this summer. Reguilon is an interesting one. My earlier prediction was that Sergio Reguilon would also come back this summer and be our backup left back next year with Ferland Mendy starting, but I think because of the season and everything that's happened recently, as everyone knows, I think Marcelo, we are going to give him one more year at the Bernabeu, and then he's going to leave next summer, which leaves Reguilon with this sort of weird year where he doesn't know how to take his career, and I think maybe sending him back to Sevilla on loan for another year would be a really good option. But that's really all I have for Real news. There's not too much going on, like I said. We're just going to have to wait and see on those coronavirus results. Hopefully everything comes back negative, and La Liga will be planning a official return date very soon. Well, before we hop into transfers, I wanted to touch on a segment we'll be doing every once in a while. I don't know if we'll do it every single episode, but today we have a special one. So today will be our first segment of Today in History. Now, we're going to try and do a bunch of different things, whether that be fan violence, some crazy event, a coach going crazy on the sideline, a famous red card, a famous goal. It could be really anything. But today in history, 14 years ago, Zinedine Zidane played his final game at the Bernabeu and said goodbye to the Bernabeu faithful. He didn't retire immediately after this, but it just rounded out a truly special career from Zinedine Zidane, one of the greatest footballers we've ever seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't agree more with anything you just said, but I think, obviously that wasn't the last game we saw him play. We saw him at the World Cup later that summer, and the iconic headbutt in the final. I think, a lot of people considered that to be a big part of his career. We'll talk about more about that and more about Zinedine Zidane later in this episode, actually. But yeah, no, absolutely legend of the game, and it's great that we have this opportunity to celebrate him.
Well, next up, we're going to cover a couple transfer rumors. We have 2 this week for y'all, so I'm going to send it over to Sam with our first one.
Yeah, so the first one I'm going to talk about is Tanguy Ndombele. Now, I think a lot of people were very interested to see kind of how his development would work at Tottenham. Last summer, he was kind of being chased by everyone, all the top teams in Europe. Everyone saw his potential and his ability. I think, when he first joined Tottenham, he got off to a great start. He had a couple of fantastic games, and I think people were raving about him. People were praising Tottenham for getting that across the line. But it seems like in the last couple of months, things have just gone really, really south with him, whether that be his relationship with Jose Mourinho, the current manager, or whether that be his own style of play, his own game, whether it started lacking a little bit. And maybe, this coronavirus break has been what he's needed to kind of refocus. I think, it's a really difficult situation for Daniel Levy in charge there, because he really went out and paid a lot of money for Ndombele last summer, but in my opinion, it was a great transfer. And I think it would really be a shame to see him leave Tottenham now when things really hadn't even gotten started yet.
Yeah, Levy rarely splashes the cash, and he finally did, and I think he spent it on a really good player. It was a wise decision. Yet with everything that went down with Pochettino and now Mourinho coming in, it just seems like it's resulted in a really toxic relationship between the two. Mourinho has publicly come out and said Ndombele doesn't fit his system. He doesn't like his work ethic. He needs to adjust. And
this is definitely a topic for argument. Does Daniel Levy put a player before the manager in this case? Because personally, I would never be for that. The manager is the most important element of a team. He, holds the team together. He's the man manager. He's the tactical genius of a team. But in this case, I just can't help but think that maybe moving on Mourinho is smarter than moving on Ndombele here. I mean, you have a player, a midfielder, who could be at the center of your team for a long, long time, whereas you brought in Jose Mourinho earlier this year for a short-term, 2-year maximum kind of fix for this team. I just don't see why you would want to move on Ndombele if given a choice.
Yeah, if I'm Levy, I look at it this way. Which individual has a brighter career ahead of them? Mourinho obviously has his past, but for the past 5 years or so, he really hasn't been relevant. He hasn't been a winner. He causes toxic relationships. He seems to have a very small lifespan on him as far as coaching goes before things go sour. I would personally stick with Ndombele and send Mourinho off.
So now, Ryan, I know you have a little bit on Thomas Partey. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Thomas Partey is a really interesting one. He has been a key consistent figure in this Atletico Madrid team for a few years now, sort of a late bloomer in that regard. No one really rated him as a younger player, but in the past couple years he's really come up and been a central cog in Diego Simeone's machine that he's run for Atletico Madrid, and because of that he's been linked with a lot of clubs.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of people will consider him to Rodri last summer, who left for left for Manchester City. Excuse me. Not necessarily the same player, but there's definitely an argument that Thomas Partey and his agent could be using this whole transfer rumor to get a new contract at Atletico Madrid. I think that him as a player needs to move on from there. He needs to move to the Premier League. I think he really wants to. He needs to move to a team where he can kind of be the centerpiece there and get more attention towards him and his individual ability.
Well, right now he is linked to just about every Premier League club with the money under the sun. This past week, The Telegraph has given a very strong link between Partey and Arsenal, and they've even claimed that Partey has told some of his friends, his family, even teammates that Partey wants to go to Arsenal, which is extremely odd given Arsenal's circumstances, their lack of money, the contract situation with Aubameyang. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. But at the same time, a lot of us see him leaving. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with Thomas Partey. Personally, I'm going to give this transfer probably a 2 or 3. He definitely could leave, but I think with the coronavirus situation and a lot of Premier League clubs focusing their transfer targets in different areas, I think we're going to get one more year out of Partey at Atletico Madrid.
Personally, I'm a little more optimistic about Partey leaving Atletico Madrid. I'm going to give this actually a 4 out of 5 here, a 4 or a 5, out of 10. I just think for him personally, the move is away from the Wanda Metropolitano. I think that for him to develop his career more, he needs to get away. He needs to play in a new system around with new teammates and get a little more attention. So, and then also moving back to Ndombele, I never gave my kind of rating for that one. I think that there's a strong chance he could leave, but I'm not sure. It all depends on what happens with Jose Mourinho. I'm going to give it also kind of a 5 out of 10. It's just we have to wait and see kind of how that develops there.
Yeah, I guess I'll touch on Ndombele as well. I think unless something drastic happens once the Premier League returns, I'm expecting Spurs to stick with Mourinho for one more year, and I do think Ndombele is going to leave this summer. What club, I have no idea yet, but I'm going to give this a 6 or a 7. I would have it higher normally, but with the coronavirus, we don't really know what buying clubs have the money yet, but we'll have to wait and see. So now we're going to kick it off to our main segment of today's show. As y'all saw, the title of this episode was The Perfect Squad for a reason. So Sam and I are going to discuss our favorite Real Madrid-Manchester United combined 11. Now, we've touched on in previous episodes, both Sam and I are 21. We haven't been around forever, so we're definitely going to put a lot of emphasis on our Dream 11 from years like after 2000, especially there's a good amount of players from beyond 2010. So we're going to have a look at this team, and we are just going to go through them one at a time. So I'm going to start us off with the goalkeeper, and this, right off the bat, was a pretty strong debate between Sam and I. You know, there are a lot of for sure's in this team, but there are some others where talent is so close in the same position that it's really hard. And eventually we decided on trophies, particularly the World Cup, being the difference between what goalie we were going to choose. And because of that, we went with Iker Casillas.
Being a United fan, growing up, we've had some incredible goalkeepers, and for me, it was difficult to kind of give this to a Real Madrid player with, kind of Peter Schmeichel, Edwin van der Sar, David De Gea having so much success. We've had little spells where we haven't had the best goalies, but other than that, those 3 names I just mentioned, they were hard for me to kind of pass up on. But Iker Casillas has been, his track record, the amount of trophies he's won. He deserves to be there.
Yeah, he has truly done it all, both on the international level and at the club level. Well, next up, we are going to go to our defense, and we are going to start us off at left back. Now, left back was another one of those positions. We were between a couple of different players, but at the end of the day, we went with what many of y'all are probably expecting, and that is Marcelo. Now, Marcelo has essentially redefined the left back role in the modern era. He has become that left back that pushed forward, could go inside, could overlap, whip in balls. He created a really good relationship with both his striker and the left winger in front of him, and he's kind of the beginning of that attacking generation of fullbacks we now see at teams like Liverpool.
Absolutely, and as you mentioned with Liverpool just now, the best teams these days have always had these fullbacks that can just bomb up the field, that aren't necessarily prioritizing defending, but really going for it, really getting up the field, just really evolving the game as it goes on. And Marcelo, with his skill, his ability, his ability to kind of tuck in and play maybe kind of an inverted left winger, was just incredible to watch sometimes when he was playing on that left side with Cristiano Ronaldo. He could just cut in and be an extra element of a game that was just so hard to defend.
And technically, Marcelo was just almost unbeatable. Some of the touches on display, the passes. I always remember if he wasn't overlapping Cristiano, he was actually being allowed to cut inside, take shots, play 1-2s with Benzema. Just the ability he had, whether it was technical, the shooting, whatever it was, just an absolute joy to watch. One of the best left backs we've ever seen in European football.
Yeah, and now that we go from kind of a new style of player, we're going to go to the two center backs here, very old school players, Rio Ferdinand and Nemanja Vidic, both of Manchester United, of course. I've talked about this a lot before, with Ryan. These two center backs were no nonsense, if you've ever heard the term before, because they would just get the ball out. That was the priority of defenders in kind of the mid-2000s and especially Sir Alex Ferguson teams, is just get the ball out, let's defend first, and then we can build off of that, especially with the quick attacking play on the wings, kind of through the middle, distributing out wide. The job of the two center backs was to get the ball away, and there was not much better at one-on-one defending, at aerial clearances, than Rio Ferdinand and Nemanja Vidic. The two as a partnership lasted so long and were so unbeatable together. Of course, in 2008, just that season, Manchester United won the Champions League in Moscow. The two were just unbeatable, and there were so many times where you would see teams lumping in crosses from the side, having quick attacks going through, and you see Rio Ferdinand and especially Nemanja Vidic kind of stick their heads in the most unnatural places, get anything in the way of the ball. And I think that's kind of a lost art of defenders these days.
Vidic was absolutely terrifying as a defender. I remember watching him. He just embodied fear in so many attacking players and the managers he was going up against. Absolutely terrifying defender. I think Thierry Henry has even mentioned him as one of the defenders he struggled with the most. So Vidic for sure is just an incredible defender. Definitely no nonsense. Doesn't play around with it at the back. Absolute world-class defender. And you partner that with Rio Ferdinand, who for a while was the best defender at the time when it came to defending set pieces, corners, and a lot of that had to do with his height. Just an absolute amazing combo, and when they were in their prime, nobody was getting past them, it felt like.
No, absolutely, and of course Rio Ferdinand being the captain for so long, being that huge splash in the transfer window in 2003 that Alex Ferguson kind of went and stuck his leg out for. 30 million pounds at the time was just massive for a defender, and it really turned out that he was absolutely worth it, and one of the best defenders our club's ever seen.
Moving on to the right back position, we have a player that we've sort of moved out of position, and that's because both Real Madrid and Manchester United over the years, although they've had really good right backs, they've never had anyone that's truly stood out. Real Madrid has had Dani Carvajal, who's been an amazing right back, arguably for a time the best right back in the world, tons of trophies, but at the end of the day, what we decided to do was move Sergio Ramos out to the right. He played center back when he was younger at Sevilla and early on at Real Madrid, also in the Spanish national team, so we think he could definitely do the job. We've touched on Sergio Ramos in other episodes. Whether you like him or you despise him, he is a leader. He gets the job done defensively. He bleeds for whatever team he's playing for, and we think Sergio Ramos would be the perfect fit in our team at the right back position.
Yeah, absolutely. And we wanted to do kind of a formation where we could get the best players in, and we may have moved, Sergio Ramos out of position a little bit, but I think, most of the players on this team we've shown you, we're going to talk about here, could play a variety of positions. They were just that skilled. And I think even today, if you were to put Sergio Ramos at right back, he would do a fantastic job. That's just the player he is. He's just hard-nosed, kind of a grinder, always sticking up for his teammates, and we've seen with Sergio Ramos, he may get in trouble sometimes for just bombing forward, and that's because he's so good going forward. His instincts, both defensively and attacking wise, are just unmatched sometimes. And now we will move on to the midfield. We chose a midfield three here, and this was very difficult. There were some incredible players for both our clubs that we kind of argued on, that we kind of really keyed in on to put in this team. But I think two out of the three are kind of locked in, and then maybe one we can talk about a little in further detail. But going for that kind of holding position out of the midfield three, we're going with Paul Scholes. Now, I talked about Paul Scholes in the last episode as one of my favorite players, and it's just there's not enough good things you can say about Paul Scholes if you got to watch him. One of the most influential players of all time. He bled United red. He would put himself in any tackle. He would work up and down the field all the time, play some incredible passes, and score some incredibly important goals. It just didn't feel like an all-time great United Real Madrid team without Paul Scholes in it.
Yeah, obviously, almost all these players in our team are world-class players, and at their prime are some of the best in the world. But I think one thing that makes this combined 11 so good is the leadership qualities with so many players. We're going to touch on a few more later in other positions, but already we've talked about Rio Ferdinand, Iker Casillas, Paul Scholes, Sergio Ramos. All of them have captained their clubs before. They've all just been incredible leaders, whether that's in the locker room, on the field. They can handle their teammates. They can talk to their coach as well. And I think that's one thing that separates them from a lot of good players.
A lot of the players in this team, too, they have a grit. Like, a lot of players you see nowadays, I think the new era coming through, they're kind of passive. They just kind of have a lot of skill, but they don't really have, too much personality out there. And all of these players in this team just have huge personalities, and they were just fantastic to watch. But Paul Scholes, just in general, the way he would just get stuck into challenges, the way he would just embody the team, be the face of Manchester United, and be that player that so many players wanted to play with. That's definitely the reason we've chose him to be the kind of the holding midfielder of this group.
Now on the right side of our midfield, we have Zinedine Zidane, who many consider to be one of the greatest footballers we've ever seen. Just the absolute French maestro, the French magician, ran up and down the field, the perfect touch, always taking touches into space, always making key passes, got up and down the field, some incredible goals like the Bayer Leverkusen volley, an absolute icon both as a player and a manager. Then on the left side of our midfield, this is where it gets interesting. We kind of debated a couple different players. Some of them will be subs later on that we're going to touch on, but at the end of the day, we decided to go with Luka Modric. Now, Luka Modric hasn't been around for forever. Since his move to Spurs, he's kind of really moved to that elite level footballer, but we've all seen his World Cup with Croatia, absolutely incredible, ends up winning the Ballon d'Or, which very few players can say they've done. Just took that Real Madrid midfield with Toni Kroos and Casemiro to an entire new level. Those three midfielders resulted in Madrid winning 4 out of 5 Champions Leagues in a period of 5 years. Madrid stepped onto the field, particularly in the Champions League, and we knew no midfield was going to outmatch those three. So we decided to go with Luka Modric, his box-to-box midfield position he plays, just absolutely remarkable. Also captained Croatia and took those underdogs to a World Cup final. A player at his peak, you just can't really run with him in European football.
Absolutely, and something we talked about in the last episode was how trophies affect the view of players and overall in their careers, and I think that Luka Modric over the last kind of 6 or 7 years has been a huge part of that Real Madrid team that won, of course, 4 Champions Leagues, winning La Liga a couple of times, and then as Ryan mentioned, that incredible Croatia team that, similar to what Ajax did in the Champions League last year, kind of crawled into our hearts and we all kind of pulled for. Even if they didn't win, Luka Modric is remembered as one of the best players at that World Cup, and absolutely earning him a Ballon d'Or for sure.
So next up, like I said, we have a 4-3-3, so we're going to move on to our attacking roles. Now on the left side is probably the most obvious player in our entire team, that is Cristiano Ronaldo. Sam and I both think he is one of the greatest players ever. He could truly do it all. He would bring that clutch gene that this team needs, that ability to put an entire team on his back. He's Mr. Champions League. His goal-scoring record is basically unbeatable unless you're talking Messi. I mean, he's just the most obvious player in our entire team.
I think that when you mention players that, kind of were the greatest in their leagues in history, I think Cristiano Ronaldo, having played in the Premier League for only, 5 or 6 years, he's still considered one of the best Premier League players of all time. And just how that can be possible, I have no idea. But
he was only 22, 23, right, when he left? It might have been 24,
yeah,
but regardless, he was
a little
young.
older, but no, absolutely. And that's just ever since he joined, the day he joined, you could tell there was something different about the kid. And once he kind of, grew into the stature and really realized his ability and, really got given the freedom by Alex Ferguson to go and do what he was incredibly good at, and that was, score goals and just shoot the ball from wherever he wants, and then, mastermind these counterattacks. That's how he kind of got started and really grew into the player that we saw at Real Madrid for so long. Now, at the number 9 position, we're going to go for Wayne Rooney. Now, I talked about Wayne Rooney again last episode when I talked about my favorite players of all time, and I'll just add on that a little bit. Wayne Rooney, when we put together this team, I think we were thinking about, the best players for our clubs, and I don't think that this could have been a Manchester United Real Madrid combined 11 without Manchester United's all-time leading goal scorer. And Wayne Rooney, the output that he would bring to the field every single time he stepped on it, he would be 8 out of 10 performances every single week. He would never really go missing. A lot of times we see great strikers. They might, kind of fade away, in games. But Wayne Rooney always dropping back to get the ball, playing that hybrid, 9, 10-ish position, dropping back, getting the ball, spreading out to the wings, scoring some incredibly important goals. I don't think you can say enough about how important Wayne Rooney was to Manchester United.
I've said this previously, but I feel like no matter what career path you go down, someone's biggest strength has to be adaptability. And we look at these great players, and they are able to adapt. Wayne Rooney and Cristiano Ronaldo, when they were young, they played a certain position. As they grew older, they began to shift to a new position. They always find a way to make themselves extremely valuable, and that is so, so important. Also, both of them could honestly have a bad game. It happens to everyone, no matter how good you are. But, the 70, 75th, 80th minute rolls around, they've kind of been absent for most of the game, and then boom, they score a really important goal. So you combine the clutch and the adaptability, and both Wayne Rooney and Cristiano Ronaldo are shoo-ins for our team. Last up is another player that's going to be a little out of position, but we think the quality he possesses still allows him to be in this team, and that is Raul. And I know Sam didn't get to see a lot of Raul. I even didn't get to see a lot of Raul live. Much of my experience watching Raul came at Schalke after he left Real, but even at Schalke, towards the very end of his career, you would watch games in the Bundesliga and just be amazed. You would think, wow, he is still one of the best players on the field, if not the best. Just his composure, his finishing, his leadership, all of these sort of make Raul one of Real Madrid's greatest ever players. He always turned up. Like Sam said, something that he respected so much about Wayne Rooney is he always seemed to have a 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 performance. The same can be said about Raul, and he could pop up out of nowhere. He was super dynamic. He could kind of be that poacher in front of goal, or he could make runs in behind through the channels, score from outside the box, truly do it all. And before Cristiano Ronaldo, he was the man for Real Madrid.
I think that, something I want to mention real quick is a lot of the players in this team, you can associate them with an era of that team, and Raul definitely is a part of that as well, kind of the pre-Cristiano era. He was Mr. Real Madrid before that, and every player in this team you can associate a time period with, and that might seem a little obvious, but when you think about it a little deeper, all of these players were key contributors and huge success for their teams in one way or another.
I think what Sam said, although it may seem obvious, is a really, really good point. Looking back at this team, I'm just reading these names and thinking, wow, at the time when these players were at their peak, they were considered either the best or top 3 in their position. They sort of defined an era for whatever club they played for. Incredible players, almost untouchable when they were at their prime in their career, and I think this is an absolutely remarkable team.
So for the manager of this team, I think it was completely obvious for us on who to choose here. There are some candidates that could maybe push this manager, but Alex Ferguson, just what he brought to a team was just that central figurehead, and every player that ever played under him just calls him the boss. he was so demanding of his players. He expected so much of them. He expected them to be not only fantastic players, but good human beings as well. He expected 100% every time. Tactically, an absolute genius. And there was a thing, about Manchester United, which we never adapted the way we played to other teams. We always played that attacking philosophy, no matter who we were playing against. And that all comes from the boss, Alex Ferguson. One of my favorite quotes about him was from Arsene Wenger, actually. And in 2005, around that area, he said, the Arsenal Invincibles will not reach that point that United reached until we win 3 championships in a row. And Alex Ferguson did that 3 times, and that is something that we may never see again. That success from a manager at one club, and with players moving on and managers moving on so much nowadays, it's just so hard for me to see another manager even getting close to the stature that Alex Ferguson had at Manchester United. Pep Guardiola, a fantastic manager. Jose Mourinho has been a great manager for a long time, and there are plenty of other candidates, but I don't think they come even close to the track record that Alex Ferguson has, and the stature that he has worldwide was just untouchable.
I definitely agree. Sir Alex Ferguson is the greatest coach we have ever seen. I could say Zidane has, in the short term, produced an output that is absolutely ridiculous. The Champions League record he has is almost unbeatable right now, but he just doesn't have the longevity yet. And time will tell. Maybe one day we can say Zidane has surpassed Alex Ferguson, but as of right now, I just don't think you could argue with anyone other than Ferguson.
So now, as we get into the subs bench here, we'll start off with the goalie. As we mentioned earlier, there were so many other candidates we could have chosen, but Casillas, I think, just barely kind of topped all the other candidates. For me, the obvious choice was Edwin van der Sar. Now, in 2008, of course, he was huge for Manchester United and getting us a Champions League trophy that year. And I think he was a very special case because he got better as his career went on. And that's kind of weird to say about a professional footballer, but as he got older, he got even better. He still owns the longest clean sheet record in the history of the Premier League at 14 games. That's just incredible. And obviously, he doesn't have the success trophy-wise as Casillas does, but I think that he still has to be respected very heavily for what he did for both Manchester United and the Netherlands as well. Now moving on to kind of our extra defender in this team, kind of that extra fullback. And as Ryan said earlier, Marcelo just topped that list, but there were some great fullbacks for both Manchester United and Real Madrid. And I think Patrice Evra had to be kind of on the subs bench here. Patrice Evra, I don't think a lot of people would consider him, the most technically gifted fullback ever, but he always gave 100% for the team, and we saw him come up with some very, very clutch moments. He kind of, embodied the badge and really gave the team everything he had. He was a great leader for this team. As we talked about earlier, all the players in this team, whether starters and subs, had incredible leadership ability and were able to convey that to their teammates and show the fans, how good they were technically, gifted, but also how hard they played and how much they cared. And I think Patrice Evra is the perfect encapsulation of a great player who may not, have had the most successful career, but really showed how good he was over the course of the 8 or so years he was at United.
Next up, we have our midfield subs. I think we chose to leave out a center back substitution because Sergio Ramos is able to play in those different positions. So because of that, we just went straight to our midfield subs and snuck in an extra midfielder. So first up, we have Toni Kroos. This one was debated a little bit about whether or not we should put him in the squad or maybe do a center back or another winger of some kind. But at the end of the day, we decided to go with Toni Kroos. Similar to Luka Modric, he has so many strengths. He just seems to do everything right. And although Luka Modric may be a little more mobile, Toni Kroos just has that passing ability. I think for a couple years now, he's been the best passer in the world. We see games where he hasn't misplaced the pass at all, and that's routine. Watching La Liga games, maybe 1 or 2 passes go astray, but other than that, he has a perfect record. He can dominate a midfield. He's probably one of the best set piece takers in the world. Absolutely incredible player, and I think he would be amazing coming off our bench for this team.
And next up on the bench, we have Ryan Giggs. Now, I think that for a lot of the players in this team, as Ryan mentioned earlier, we picked a lot of players that were from kind of the 2000s and on. And I think Ryan Giggs kind of missed out on a spot in this starting team because his prime was kind of before that. Where we saw the best Ryan Giggs and the biggest moments of Ryan Giggs was kind of in the 1990s. But I think that, given that he played so many games for Manchester United, he was such a key piece of our team for so long. He just had to be kind of mentioned in this team somewhere, playing over 900 games for Manchester United. That is incredible. He's one of those players that you just considered with Francesco Totti, Pablo Maldini, these players that you associate with a club, and I think that's Ryan Giggs. And I think that's a huge part of that was his skill and individual ability, but also being a team player and moving from that left side, growing up to a center mid position and being a captain of Manchester United and being kind of that, that prodigal son of Manchester United and embodying kind of our philosophy of youth. Everything I just mentioned, it fits all into Ryan Giggs. And next up, we will go for David Beckham on the right side. Now, personally for me, obviously, I didn't get to see David Beckham playing for Manchester United for very long, if at all. Of course, moving away from Old Trafford in 2003. But I think the difference he made for both of our clubs, for both Manchester United and Real Madrid, was just spectacular. And he was just an incredibly gifted player, but also not just at club level, at international level as well. An incredibly important player for England, and being kind of the star man for the England national team and being that figurehead for both Manchester United and Real Madrid. And I think that he had to be mentioned on this list because of the impact he made, not only on the pitch but off the pitch as well, just being considered that superstar that both teams were much better with than without. And kind of as we move on to the attacking players, the more attacking players on this list, and the substitutes bench, for me, Ruud van Nistelrooy had to be on this list. Now, this is another player, of course, that played for both Manchester United and Real Madrid. I know him, more personally for his time at Manchester United and his time for the Netherlands as well, being such a great finisher. Now, Ruud's one of those players we talked about earlier who could stay, kind of ghost around, maybe stay silent for maybe 70 minutes, and then bang, he could score 3 goals in 15 minutes to win you a game and to engineer you a comeback. Kind of his role for United in that huge rivalry we had with Arsenal in the early 2000s, kind of moving into the mid-2000s, was just phenomenal. And I think Ruud van Nistelrooy, maybe not known for his leadership like other players on this list, but he just one of the best finishers we've ever seen. And he could score from anywhere. He could pick up the ball, score from anywhere. He held his nerve at all times. There are some moments you can look back on, specific moments, specifically against Arsenal for United, where he may have been being thrown around by defenders and kind of really, being really roughed up as the, kind of the old way we knew football, and he still stuck with it and always scored that huge goal.
Now, our last substitution, we were between the two players that used to make up the BBC, and that is Karim Benzema and Gareth Bale. And at the end of the day, we decided to go with the player with a little more longevity, and so we went with Karim Benzema. Now, Karim Benzema has truly done it all for Real. He moved at a young age from Olympique Lyon to Real in 2009, the same year Cristiano moved to the Bernabeu. And from a longevity perspective, he's still around today, and he's still producing at a really high level. Most people would have him in their top 5, top 10 strikers in the world. So he's been at the Bernabeu for over a decade, producing at the highest level. He's formed incredible relationships with his teammates like Cristiano, Marcelo, and been able to produce a lot of goals. And something that really separates Karim Benzema from so many strikers we've seen are not just the goals, but you have to factor in that relationship that I just touched on. Being that key cog in the middle of the BBC and allowing himself to sort of go into the shadow of Bale and Ronaldo and let them produce those magical moments. That can't be understated. It's not all about being selfish. Being able to distribute it from a striker is something we don't see too often, but he did it in such a way that was absolutely elegant. Once Ronaldo left, we've seen Benzema improve his numbers statistically. Obviously, he doesn't really have to do the distribution job that he was doing when he was part of the BBC, but now we've seen his goal numbers go up. His assists are still pretty good, and he's led the line for Real Madrid.
And, with that concluding our team here and our, our starting lineup and our manager and our substitutions, we want you guys to kind of tell us what you think about this. If you agree, if you want to kind of comment on our team, Real Madrid and Manchester United wise, or if you want to kind of get with a friend and do this with them as well, get with 2 different clubs and do this with that as well, please reach out to us and tell us what you think as well. I think that's going to kind of wrap up everything we have this week on the Manchester to Madrid World Football Podcast. Next week, we are going to kind of preview the Bundesliga, and we have maybe a special interview coming on for you guys, so stay tuned in for that. We'll be covering lots of other football drama across the globe, transfers, and everything, as we always do. If you'd like what you heard today, please subscribe to us on wherever you get your podcast. Follow us on Podbean and share us with some of your football friends as well. Thank you guys for all the support, and we will speak to you very soon.